This week, we're doing a flashback to an episode that was one of our more popular conversations and a topic that continues to be of great interest. It's a question I often hear from parents. Who is classical Christian education really for? You see, there's a common misconception that it's reserved for naturally gifted or high-achieving students only. But what if that's simply not true? In this conversation, Heather Lloyd argues that if classical Christian education is truly rooted in truth and wisdom and in Christ, it should be accessible to far more students, including those with learning differences. It's a thoughtful discussion that may reshape the way you think about who belongs in the classical classroom. Join us for this episode of Basecamp Live.
Mountains. We all face them as we seek to influence the next generation. Get equipped to conquer the challenges, summit the peak, and shape exceptionally thoughtful, compassionate, and flourishing human beings. We call it Ancient Future Education for raising the next generation. Welcome to Basecamp Live. Now your host, Davies Owens.
Welcome to another episode of Basecamp Live. Davies Owens, your host here on the journey of raising up the next generation. I have the joy so often of being on your campuses and getting to meet with you in person. Keith McCurdy and I are continuing this fall and into next winter and spring our roadshow series, which is where we come together and join forces to present to parents and educators both Keith's expertise in the area of helping families learn how to live sturdy and a very wobbly culture around us. And then I provide wisdom and insights on just the importance and a clear understanding of what is classical Christian education. How does it apply in our homes and in our schools? If you're interested in having us join you on your campus, you can read more on the Basecamp Live website. Of course, we also travel independently, and there's certainly opportunities there as well. More than anything, we just want to be a part of your community and serve you. Speaking of school communities, a big shout out to Brandon Johnston, head of school at Coram Deo Academy in Bremerton, Washington, along with Brad Doloff, head of school at School of the Ozarks in Point Lookout, Missouri. Big shout out and thank you to both of you for being a part of the Basecamp Live and Zipcast communities. We appreciate your partnership in raising up the next generation and being a part of the encouragement that you provide every day to your teachers and your parents and students. Thanks so much for your partnership. It's a joy to have the opportunity to jump back into this conversation with my good friend Heather Lloyd. Heather has been a part of classical Christian education for decades. She's a teacher. She's got the privilege now of looking over her shoulder at her own children and grandchildren. She, as a very full-time job, runs Concordus Partners, where she provides strategic guidance and help and support to countless schools around the country. She's consulted with schools providing resources from the early days of school startup, as well as training them in education programs and classroom guidance. Heather's an amazing individual who has a great perspective in guiding schools to be better adapted at serving a broad array of students with a variety of needs. You're going to enjoy this conversation. Before we jump into it, as always, a big shout out to those who have partnered with us and sponsored this episode, our friend Robert Littlejohn and Chuck Evans and their book, Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents. Of course, our friends with Life Architects, coaching Tammy Peterson and her very helpful wisdom and resources that she provides, especially young people who are moving into the next phase of life and wanting guidance, moving from high school into college. And then the folks at the Wise Phone, a great alternative to the smartphone. And of course, the Herzog Foundation, our friend and partnership there, who provide amazing training resources for school leaders all around the country. Finally, a quick mention of our partnership with our own Zipcast. You know, if you are part of a school that is not using Zipcast, there are so many new features. It's a weekly communication tool that is a blessing to parents on the go. In fact, this year we're adding a content library that's got over 1,000 segments that schools can pick from, including many short 2-minute excerpts from Basecamp Live, the full podcast. We've shrunk down to just some wisdom moments that I'm sure you'll appreciate. All of that and more is available if you take a look at the zipcast.media website. You can sign up for a discovery call and meet our team that's really good at just overall communication strategy at your school and giving you wisdom and guidance. Well, without further ado, here's my conversation with Heather Lloyd. Welcome to Basecamp Live. Davies Owens on the line with Heather Lloyd. How are you, Heather?
Great. Thank you, Davies.
It's so good to have you here, Heather. For those who do not know you, you are the director and founder of Concordus Educational Partners. You've got over 20 years of teaching experience, including teaching your own 5 children, which is the best way to learn education. And you've consulted with and have started multiple schools in the last 2.5 years that you guys have been around, working with classical Christian schools and colleges and performing arts programs. You have a very unique vantage point, Heather. I would love to begin by just hearing from you as you kind of look across the landscape in this COVID world of all that's happening in education and classical Christian schools. What are you seeing?
Great question. I think what's most exciting right now in this COVID climate is that Christian education is growing. And so there's people asking more questions. And there's also a lot more people pouring into Christian schools, which starts to change what schools need. It also is starting to really, people in small communities are saying, please give us something. Can we start a school? How hard is it? And I think the model that was around for so long of starting a school, was the capital need was so huge. You were looking at trying to do 12 grades or at least 8 grades, 9 grades, right it up front, or growing gradually. And it meant that the family wasn't learning together for years and years.
Wow.
It changed things. So I think looking at it's kind of time to just launch a lot of schools is what I'm seeing in the climate.
Yeah, classical Christian schools are growing, and as they grow and as they start, you have again a very unique vantage point because you can kind of build it right from the beginning. So often, as this movement's now 40, 50 years old, there's a lot of already legacy schools that are kind of entrenched. And we're going to talk later in the podcast about some of the non-negotiables of classical Christian education. But I know one area that you really have dealt deeply in, and I hear all the time from parents saying, we love classical Christian education, and it was perfect for our firstborn kind of overachiever child, and now the middle child did okay, but boy, that thirdborn, I think maybe has some special needs, and the school's telling me there's really not a place for them. Talk a little bit about what you have done as far as helping guide schools, and this is a big part of the whole podcast, but just to set up this idea that classical Christian schools are, in fact, for a lot more children than are often assumed fit the model.
Well, I think what has happened is classical has been labeled as rigorous, right? Classical has this component of rigor kind of being a side definition. And I don't think if you read the, scripture, if you read the ancients, if you read some solid medieval authors on education, rigor is not the most important component. And when you take that out and you say excellent education should be for all, it starts to change how you look at it. For me personally, our 5th child is adopted and things changed dramatically. Whereas my bio kids, just kind of classical education came to them. They did great. Everything was wonderful. All the memorization was there. And our 5th child came along and didn't fit the mold. And yet I sat there going, do I really want this child to not get this education based on truth, right? This education that points towards Christ, teaches reasoning. He's fully able to reason. He is not able to memorize.
Yeah.
And that changed my idea of how I looked at it. So I think that we have to relook at what really is true Christian classical education. And I almost think switching that Christian education by definition should be truth-seeking, right? Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. So it should be aimed towards Christ. And if our entire goal of education is aimed towards truth and teach children in that discernment towards truth, that changes how you set up the structure of a school. It's not defined by Latin. It's not defined by certain core kind of classical classes. It's actually the idea of aimed at truth, and then logic becomes a component of that, Latin becomes a component of that, but maybe taught in a different way.
Well, it does seem like, going back to the term rigor, I mean, and this is like an oversimplification, but I think it's where most people assess schools that, I've said for years, the stereotype is you stop a person on the street and say, first thing that comes to mind when I say Christian education, what do you think? And, secular or sacred person would say, highly religious, but probably not a really sharp academic, a kind of a weak academic. And that, I think that's not a false stereotype. There is that sense of we want a school to be inclusive of everyone, and we want to share truth, and we want to show Jesus to everyone. And so the academics get sort of sidelined, and then you end up with kind of the mushy, squishy academic school. And then along comes classical Christian saying, we don't want to be that. So we're going to kind of swing the pendulum really hard the other way into the rigor world, where every kid is, grinding, and we'll talk about Charlotte Mason later too, kind of eating gravel. But isn't that amazing that they can endure all of that, and aren't they smart? So is there a middle on this, or are we sort of, because it does seem like you got squishy or you got really rigor. So how do you sort those two extremes out?
Ooh, I think it gets into, and I know it's become just cliche, but like that love of learning. If we, far more important than rigor is to instill a love of learning. And there's going to be a rigorous element, right, to a child that naturally loves learning. But I think that's also very individual, especially in the young ages. There's some 5-year-olds, for example, that might be ready for a lot of memorization. They're just built that way. And this gets into, you and I had chatted earlier about the mythical middle. Like we kind of tend to, when you have a large class, 18, we're considering small classes 18, but is that, gosh, we're talking a 1:18 ratio. That's still not that small. And you're trying to teach to the mythical middle that really doesn't exist, especially if you take 5, 6, 7-year-olds. There is not really an average. They're each designed so uniquely. And some do well with one thing that the other doesn't do well. And so in trying to teach that way, you end up with rigor kind of being what you fall back on to make sure you keep a high standard. But instead, we really should look at these little image bearers of God and pour into them. Where do they need? And I need to foster in them. I need to help them. We use the term that we love, we have to love the standard a lot. But that idea is, how do we get them to love the standard? Well, it's not rigor. I don't think that it's rigor that does that. And if they love the standard, they're going to love the learning. They're going to love that process. So I think we have to change how we point into those kids.
Well, and so is part of the problem that we've inherited systems of just progressive education. I mean, you go to a classical Christian open house and it's all the wonders of great books and all that, but where the rubber meets the road, and I talk about this a lot on the podcast, just had Mary Ellen St. Cyr, who runs the Ambleside schools and Charlotte Mason schools, just the pedagogical, and that's the fancy term for how do you teach? Like, that's not necessarily always understood, and we tend to teach the way we were taught. So do you see that as part of the problem, that the tension is most of our schools, kind of the reality is, honestly teach pretty much like the public school down the street. They just happen to have more, quote, rigorous materials they're putting in front. Is that a fair statement?
Very much. And if I may be so bold as to say that it's not classical at all. In fact, most of the way we structure a school with a K grade, a first grade, a second grade, a third grade, all the way up, we have 50 to 55 minute periods. We're rotating through subjects, isn't even classical. And that's why I would say those schools harm struggling learners. And 1 in 5 is a special needs student right now. 1 in 5 is a learning disability. That's huge. Now, and we can argue about the diagnoses and all that, but it's, in the end, 1 in 5 is a struggling learner. And that, I'd say, we can look around, I look at my 5 kids. Yep, 1 in 5, struggling learner. That kind of is a fitting model. And so it really, if we really go back to the root of classical, what it looks like, and maybe even throwing out that name, what does good education look like? It is not bells every 50 minutes. It's not moving out of subjects, because it's the idea, it gets into a little bit of a Charlotte Mason approach, but it's a subject on the table and those beautiful fields of study coming out. That a subject is actually the thing you're studying. And so when you start to change that, and you have kids rotating through 5, 6, 7 subjects, and grammar is a subject, and everything has this delineated period, you've separated learning, and there's not that beauty to learning. And I think that those 7-period-a-day type models are just the public school with a Christian classical subject matter intertwined. And I don't think it's not the best way, especially for anybody but the mythical middle.
Wow. I know as people are listening, like, well, I'm kind of stuck because I'm a parent or I'm a teacher and I inherited this system, or I work inside the system. We'll get to some of what do you do if you're in this situation and you think you've got that child that's kind of 1 in 5. I want to go back to the 1 in 5 here just for a minute before we go to a break. So, when you think of the special needs, I could think of it being everything from literally a diagnosed dyslexia or something, all the way to just maybe the learning style of that student. And I know, again, boys and girls are different. God made them that way. And yet my sense is that most of our schools don't even have a criteria. Maybe it's because teachers have not, because we pride ourselves in not sending our teachers through kind of typical institutional educational training. And so sometimes the downside of that is they're not calibrated to say there are different learning styles. There's different maybe ways genders learn. Is that 1 in 5 coming because we've just not positioned our teaching in such a way to really connect to that child versus them having an inherent challenge themselves? There's both and. How does that work?
Good question. I think with the 1 in 5, so we are seeing an increase in diagnoses. And I don't know the scientific reasons for that necessarily, but I would say that part of it is just we are able to detect different things, looking at neuroscience, looking at different things. I think in the end we'd find out that this has been the case all along. That's just my guess. But that idea that 1 in 5 there's a learning difference in a very big classroom doesn't allow for a lot of learning differences. And so if you can't you can't really, how much time can you actually spend with 18 to 20 students? It's tough, right? It's hard to do that and see what they need and make the tweaks for them. I think good teachers naturally do that, but you're still kind of grouping kids, like this group is a visual learner, this group, so I'm going to try to teach in all 3 ways. So I think you have to change the way the classroom works, and you also have to think about the trivium differently. And I think that you have to think about the trivium more classically, and that is the idea that they're not stages necessarily of development, but more stages of actual learning in the sense of I need to move from the concrete to the abstract, and each child's going to do that differently. I had a second grader in assembly the other morning. We were talking about the fall in the garden, and he raises his hand and said, "Why did God put a tree in the middle of the garden if we didn't want us to eat from it?" That's a very philosophical question. That's not a quote grammar level question.
Right.
This kid is ready for more. Well, when you realize that these are the process of learning moves from the concrete to the philosophical, then within your classroom, you can take children that are struggling and advanced, which oftentimes end up falling into the cracks either direction, and you can actually take them where they're at. The one student may actually never be able to do the very grammatical, right? They might actually not be able to memorize and get that very concrete, but they might be able to understand story and fall in love with story and fall in love with learning in a different way and never really memorize.
Yeah. That would be, well, I know folks listening are like, gosh, where is this school? Heather, we need to get there quickly. This is what we've been missing. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to, the work you're doing with Concordus is so encouraging to me because so much, you guys are doing an extensive amount. You're taking kind of existing legacy Christian schools and helping them to pivot into Christian classical, and you're helping start brand new schools. And so again, you've got this interesting opportunity to kind of build it right from the ground up. So when we come back from the break, I want to hear some of these out of the box ways. If we're going to start a school and we want to maximize it for as many students as possible, what would that school look like? We're going to take a break and be right back with Heather Lloyd.
Hi there, classical Christian parents, students, and teachers. This is Robert Littlejohn, co-author with Charles Evans of Wisdom and Eloquence, a Christian paradigm for classical learning, published by Crossway Books. We want you to know about our new book with well-known family counselor Keith McCurdy, published by Classical Academic Press. The book is titled Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents: How Classical Christian Education Can Transform Your Children, Your Family, and the World. We have written this shorter, parent-focused book specifically as an admissions and parent education resource for schools and families. We are excited to be proud sponsors of Zipcast and Basecamp Live, and we hope you are enjoying these 2 great resources for classical learning as much as we are. And we would invite you to visit our website, wisdomandeloquence.org, to explore the various services offered by the authors of Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents, and to let us know how we can best serve you. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
Today's episode of Basecamp Live is brought to you by my friend Chris Casper, who you heard on a recent episode. His invention, the Wise Phone, is a much-needed third way, providing a solution from the dangers of a smartphone on the one hand and the limited capacities of an old-school flip phone on the other. His simple, distraction-free phone design for families who want technology to serve their real lives and give us and our older children a way to do basic essentials like calling or texting or maps without the web browser and the social media and the endless apps that can pull them and us into the addictive time-wasting aspects of a smartphone. I personally have a Wise phone, and I can vouch that it is an excellent solution and an appropriate way to use technology that supports virtue and focus and healthy habits. Check out the link in our show notes and on our Basecamp Live website partners page, where Chris is offering Basecamp Live listeners a discount. Welcome back to Basecamp Live. Heather and I are talking about this very relevant topic that I think increasingly is a part of the reality of at least 1 in 5. Gosh, that's an interesting statistic. 1 in 5 students are going to be, quote, special needs in some way. And so if you have more than one child, if you have 3 children, work the averages out. I mean, it's a third of the school at some point is going to be one of those families that says, excuse me, my third born isn't working out so well here. What am I supposed to do? Leave this wonderful school and community that we were so invested in? I mean, I hear this a lot. Is that what is that number, Heather? You think it's a third?
Oh, I think it's getting, I think it's getting larger. People are more aware. And also as classical schools kind of step up, the competition is kind of who can be the most rigorous in some ways.
Yeah.
And so you're starting to leave more kids behind in many of the very rigorous classical schools. And so you've got families exactly what you said, faced with this choice. Oh, I've got my, 2 children at this school, and what do I put my third one at public school?
Right.
Where do I homeschool them?
Yeah. And so now to put on my administrator teacher hat, I mean, we're all going, yes, great. But then there's this, cold water in the face of, okay, wait a minute. We're the average classical Christian school in America right now is 165 students. So you're talking about limited resources and barely getting by with just one teacher full-time in the classroom in many cases. So now you're asking that teacher to make these, typically they're called accommodations. Johnny needs to be able to have more time on this or needs a little help with that. And, again, big public schools have multiple tracks. There's ways to do that. How on earth do you pull that off, Heather? Because it sounds great, but gosh, the practicals of unless you've got an endowment and you can hire a whole teacher brigade to come behind that one classroom teacher, or you ratchet up the number of students, which again, you indicated is part of the problem to cover the tuition. Where do you go through that fog? How do you get some traction in those kinds of environments?
I think that's the exact right question to ask. And I'd say there's 3 ways. Let's say you do have the 165 student, Christian classical school that's already going, right? They have a K through 8 or K through 12 possibly established. And you go, okay, great. We've got all these special needs coming. What do we do? I think in that situation, there's a school that is that size can be easily modified. That could be a matter of blending grades in a way, changing kind of how you rotate through material. For example, one of the suggestions I make is do whole school learning. The whole school is going through ancient, the whole school is going through medieval. And what that does is it enables the student that struggles, even if you've got the grades segregated. Let's say you've got a second grader and he's going to be in second grade for 3 years. Maybe there's, autism or, there's Down syndrome, or it's just a learning disability, and he needs to sit there and put him on repeat and repeat. No parent is going to want their child in that. But if every year he's building the same skills, but learning new content, so he's gone through ancient and he's still, learning how to spell some words, and he's still learning, the grammar of things, but he's rotating through this beautiful history and beautiful literature that he's gaining, that changes everything. So I think that's an actually easy tweak to make. That's one option. The other option is to start a parallel program. A parallel program is the idea of, and it's not a special needs program. I think it's very important. Romans 15:1 says a strong take care of the weak. If you ostracize the special needs, they act like special needs. They realize that they're segregated. But if you create a parallel program that maybe has just a different mindset than the rest of your school, different flavor to it, it might draw, first of all, you can grow the budget because you get different families in. You're able to create this structure that is able to take special needs and take advanced learners. You can do it in a blended situation. So you can start with 1 classroom, then grow to 2. Eventually, it can be a second launch campus that has a different flavor. So I think that's another one. And then there's third, start from the ground up. And that is actually very doable. I like to say if you've got $50,000, that's all you need. And that can even be pledged money to get the school going. You can start a K-8 with 4 core teachers that are well-trained, blended grades, and do an incredible job of education on a very limited budget. The model that we use, by year 2, you can usually be breaking even, and by year 3, profitable.
That's a remarkable number. So this is a ground up new school starting
Yes.
up. Okay. So is there a similar for an existing legacy school that says we would like to offer something like a parallel program? I mean, is there a jumpstart? Can you X amount of funds to bolt on a program like that? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think it's similar. 50,000 being curriculum, furniture, startup costs. That could be limited a little bit beyond that. I also think you can do it a little bit more. You've already got some resources. You've already got printers and secretaries and all that. So there's less needed to get started. You're really talking about the teachers, the program, and the training. The difference in this model is you're pouring your money into the training of the teachers, not the curriculum. And that changes everything in the budget to go driving those teachers become far more significant.
And again, just so I'm clear on this, again, most teachers, especially after this past year, are treading water with all the things they're already trying to do. Now they're being asked to take care of, and you mentioned like even a Down syndrome child. I mean, that seems like a pretty significant amount of accommodating that would need to happen. And so even if the teacher has been trained, it's just hours in the day, minutes in the class period. I mean, is that really doable without, again, the simple answer is sure, you just add a teacher's aide into the classroom to assist with those kids, or you pull them out for a period, et cetera, et cetera. But you're advocating for staying in the existing, 4-walled classroom, one teacher already busy and still can pull this off.
Right, and that's by shrinking class sizes. We say no more than 12 in a class.
But that just blew up the budget of half the schools.
Yeah, you think, but it actually doesn't if you do the blended ages. And so that's what our model with 12 kids in the classroom, we're breaking even by year 2. Oh, pending enrollment, right? So pending enrollment, obviously, but a lot of it is, again, when you simplify the education into core fields of study, humanities, math, and science, and you have TAs that are very well equipped to be able to handle one-on-ones with students, it changes the schematic of everything. And you can still charge a very reasonable tuition rate, but all your energy is going not into facilities. You can actually do this in a house.
Wow.
We started off at a house. We've got several schools starting off at one small classroom. And it's gradually growing it and getting those teachers in place who can handle and getting them in training to handle the autistic child and the Down syndrome child, and having a discipline plan that is far more focused on the individual child, because behavior is going to be the thing that causes the kerfuffle in the class, right? It's not the academic so much, but it's really, it takes the right teacher, but it is very doable. And there's tools and training that really blesses both the teacher and the student, and the other children get a chance to see what's happening. And sometimes we'll stop a class and be like, hey, let's pray for Johnny. He's having a rough day. And there is nothing more beautiful than that in Christian community. And instead of compromising education, I think it enhances education.
It's a beautiful vision, really a kingdom vision of what, and again, even thinking about in the past, I've done, Leslie Collins and others have been on, and we've talked about this very important issue, the special needs kids, but so many of them bring perspectives too. We think about our sort of, again, back to the typical open house at classical schools. Here's our Socratic table, and we do these very heady discussions, and we're at ex-college level of thoughtfulness. But you also, that's fine, but sometimes you miss the voices of people who would have a very fresh perspective that would be lost if they're not at the table as well, these special needs that don't always think the same way. That could be great. The other quick point, and I want to, a lot of ground to cover here. I want to take a break again in just a second. We'll come back to kind of looking at the non-negotiables, because a lot of this sits sort of under the underlying question is, well, what is a Christian classical or classical Christian school, however you want to describe it, in terms of this? These are really, you have to leave these pieces in place to create a school that's truly defined that way. But I want to just make a comment or get your opinion on. I mean, it does seem like conversations I've had with a lot of parents who have the 1 in 5 student, they would gladly pay a bit more money to be able to keep their child in the school and have an aide or an assistant come alongside. But usually, again, it's this very stark alternate. Either you're on the rigor treadmill or you're out of here, and there's not a lot of middle ground to even choose from.
I think that brings up a really important thing. When I think that existing schools, one of the things we are doing is we're providing actually those tutors that can help those kids stay in the school. I think that's less. I think it's more important to start to change the structure of the school, but I do think that that's a blessing to families. And we have actually tutors that are trained in special needs to help keep those kids in school. Wow. And the parents do pay more, and we are able to do that. They are thankful to do it. And so that's one of the things I would have loved to have had for our son, but it wasn't a good fit. And so we're doing that. We're doing that in several schools right now. We have tutors all over broadcasting into different offices in schools to help those kids. So they'll do a pull-out. Let's say math is their biggest, maybe they have dysgraphia. They're able to pull out that, and that works very, very well. It's a great way to help in an existing school. Ideally, I want to start to transform education.
No, I agree. Absolutely. I mean, fix it at the source. But that's, again, to the parent listening saying, okay, what do I do? Because our school is probably not going to be able to be retooled between now and when my child needs it. So Concordias has a team you can deploy, and it sounds like it's virtual. So there'd be a class period where that student goes into a room and they're being engaged by one of your team at their existing. So that's amazing. That would be And another thing we do is, if it's a younger child where Zoom would not be a good fit, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, we actually will hire somebody locally and train them, and we bring in a specialist to help them with a child that has, for example, dyslexia or even autism, and we're able to accommodate. And we meet with the teacher, the parent, and that new tutor, and we completely form this beautiful circle to support that child. That is so encouraging. so encouraging and so needed. So, Heather, let's take a quick break. Want to come back, and I really want your thoughts on this. What are the non-negotiables of classical Christian education? And we'll talk a little bit about Charlotte Mason as well. We'll be right back here on Basecamp Live.
The road to graduation begins early and takes many paths. And without a skilled guide, it can feel overwhelming. The career coaches at Life Architects empower students to discover who God created them to be through our unique vocational discipleship model. You can bring this graduation game changer to your school through one-on-one student coaching, on-campus workshops, or even faculty training. Visit lifearchitectscoaching.com today.
During this short break, I have a special invitation to all school leaders, administrators, and teachers. I want you to imagine for a moment stepping away from your everyday routine at school and diving deep into the rich foundations of Christian education, surrounded by world-class scholars, seasoned classroom teachers, and administrative experts with years of experience running schools with a lot of wisdom to share. That's exactly what the Herzog Foundation's Institute is offering. I've had the joy of serving as a training coach for the last few years, leading their 2.5-day training on spiritual formation and another one on parent engagement. They offer close to 50 unique training events ranging from board governance to marketing to classroom best practices. They even offer a training on how to teach the great books. And the best part of all, well, thanks to the generosity of the Herzog Foundation, these training events, including lodging, are completely free for Christian educators. Institutes are located around the country in beautiful locations, including at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., and the Reagan Library in Santa Barbara. Don't miss this incredible opportunity. Check out the details at theherzogfoundation.com. Welcome back to Basecamp Live. Heather, this is such a great topic, and one of the challenges of Basecamp Live is that we don't go for hours and hours, but there's so much to talk about here. But let me ask you this, because I know so often when parents or teachers talk to administrators, and even among administrators, there are these perceived non-negotiables. Someone will say, well, gosh, if we didn't do Latin all the way through 12th grade from 3rd grade, maybe there'd be some flexibility. No. We have to do Latin until 12th grade, and we have to play violins while we're doing Latin through 12th grade. It's like, well, really? I mean, and I know classical Christian schools are growing all around the world, and there's a lot of flexibility while protecting that core of what is classical Christian. So if you're advising a school, what would you say to them about where these non-negotiables are?
Great question. I think that, yes, we can often say, you're classical because you teach logic or you teach Latin. And I think we've got to get away from that. Again, look at the core of what's good Christian education. So the non-negotiables, I'm going to start with the one that might be the most, people might think sounds the most crazy, and that's progymnosmetas, which are Greek writing exercises.
Wait, say that again?
Progymnosmetas.
I wanted to say Gesundheit when you said, yes, right.
Yeah, I know. It's where we get the word gymnastics. It's spelled pro-gym. And,
right.
But and I think that they've been a missed thing. I think there's some curriculum out there that talks about them. But the ancients had an understanding of, I think, how this worked for kids. And in a lot of the schools I work with, we start them as young as second grade, which sounds crazy. But it is in that those pro-gyms are what enable you to help kids go from the grammar to the rhetoric of something within a classroom. And there's a lot more to that. That could be a whole podcast in itself. But I do think that the way we teach writing is quintessential to being able to handle both advanced and struggling learners, which, again, there is really no mythical middle. So you're able to handle the students. I think that's a non-negotiable. I think the way we do writing needs to be different. And it needs to be very classical, but truly classical. The second thing is love. And I know that sounds very vanilla and isn't that so Christian of me? But I mean real love. Mortimer Adler makes the comment that love without conversation is impossible. And I love that. And I think that conversations, good Christian classical education happens around a table setting. Not necessarily, and I mean even at the young level, it's a conversation. The only way those children are going to know how much that teacher loves them and is pouring in are those important conversations. And so you have to have subjects on the table that the conversations are coming out of that. That's just life. That's a good way to learn. I think that is a non-negotiable above and beyond Latin. Do I love Latin? Do I bring it into my schools? Yes, I do. But again, it's a subject on the table for all of this great conversation to come out of. And then I think teaching truth and discernment. And I think the pro-gyms actually fall into that category. Again, another subject matter there. But so I would say the non-negotiables are conversation, pro-gyms, and teaching truth and how to discern truth. And I know that that's very broad. But I think if we pick our curriculum, if we pick our teachers, and we based on that, and our class schedule, based on that type of philosophy, it really does change. And I think we become truly Christian classical in the way we deliver.
What I'm hearing is more you're orienting a child in a direction versus setting some arbitrary quantifiable bar. They have to be at Latin level 4 by 9th grade. And therefore, if you can't hit that stay 9 level or that performance level, you're out. I mean, that is a unnecessary and unhelpful barrier. And I know there's all these pressures, especially schools that are trying to compete in college preparatory settings where their parents are buying a ticket into a college, which again, most of our schools hopefully are not making that their lead story, but it is an important reality. Are our kids prepped and ready? And so there's that tension of we've got to keep that bar up high so that we can be competitive. And then what do we do with the kids that can't hit the bar? And it's just, again, it's messy. But I'm excited again to hear what you're doing and the way you're creating parallel programs. You're coming alongside schools, and definitely we'll give folks information on how to reach out to you. But before we go, just talk a little bit about, I'm a big fan of Charlotte Mason, the British educator 100 years ago, very much ahead of her time. She speaks, in my mind, more to the K-12 pedagogy, like this is how this classroom should look and operate and the philosophy behind it. How is her voice important to you in what you're advocating?
I really, I'm going to say something that I'm sure I will. I told you I wasn't going to try to ostracize anybody, but here I go. I think that she understood education in the heart of a child far more than Dorothy Sayers. And I think that and not that Dorothy Sayers was trying to address that, but the idea that Charlotte Mason really was looking at how children learn, And her focus was the child, not taking them to a certain level. From everything I've read about her, she's got some, I love her quote that she says that people themselves begin to clamor for an education which shall qualify their children for life rather than for earning a living. I'll stop there, but like that idea that we're raising Christians, we want them to be ready for living that life. And it's not that classical subjects, quote subjects, don't fall into that, but what is my goal with teaching Latin? What is my goal with teaching that subject? I want this child to live that life and be able to invest the talents God gave them. For some, he gave 3, and for some, he gave 1. Just to being totally honest, how do we help that child invest? Well, that's part of that is just being able to live well. I think Charlotte Mason answers the how to deliver education, how to teach a lot better than a classical model.
Well, and again, I don't even, the more I talk to teachers and heads, the kind of brutal truth is I don't think there is a classical, I mean, email me and tell me I'm wrong. I mean, other than Gregory's 7 laws, which people fumble around with, and I'm not even sure okay, what do you do with that really? This is a voice that's so needed because we teach the way we're taught, and so we're often very progressive in our classrooms because we don't know any better. And I'm curious your opinion too, because the pushback is yes, we love Charlotte Mason. Go plant a garden, chase a butterfly. This is great stuff for the little grammar school kids, but absolutely makes no sense in the middle and upper school. Is that correct in your opinion?
No, because I think, I think we see so many, one of the things I love, people walk into our school here locally and say the kids are smiling and having fun. And I thought, I love that. Learning has arduous moments, right? Learning does have, and there's toil, right? But that idea that we can enjoy the process of learning, I think the Chasing Butterflies does that. And there's something beautiful to that. And we're not talking about unschooling.
Right. It sounds like Montessori to a lot of people. So, yeah.
Right. And Maria Montessori actually had some she lined up a lot with Charlotte Mason in some of her views. And but I think it gets down to when you're a Christian aimed at teaching a child, you are looking at what cultivates their heart. Right. You're looking at what cultivates their heart. And I don't mean squishy, mushy, let the kids choose their own adventure. But the idea that I've got guardrails, I've got a place I'm pointing them, I'm moving them towards an end, but I've got this beautiful path along the way that I'm paving as a teacher. Yeah. And I think that's what Charlotte Mason understood from what I've read of her.
Yeah. Is there a particular, for somebody that's saying, okay, I've never really heard of her, or maybe I'm kind of new, is there a particular reading or direction you would point someone into to get oriented to Charlotte Mason?
I tend to love like the backstory of somebody. So I'm actually just a fan of reading about her life, where she trained. Then I usually love to do. So I'm not a good one to say, read this, this will help. I'm more of, just understanding kind of how she taught, the way she, and there's a lot of resources on the web. Sure. But I love her biography of kind of what her journey is really interesting.
That sounds great. Well, I know we're at time. Folks, I'm sure, have been stirred up positively saying, gosh, Heather, thank you. I've been struggling with this as a teacher, as a parent. Tell us where we can find you. How can people connect with you and your resources?
Yeah, thank you. So our website is concordaseducation.com. That's one, and we've got a place there, or you can email me. Feel free to email me at heather@concordaspartners.com. Either one is great. I've got a great team that I work with, and we go into schools and help with this process.
Great. And if people are curious, what does Concordus mean? Where did that name come from?
It is Latin, so I'm not anti-Latin.
Good. I'm glad you put that in.
Good Latin. Yep. Concordus means one heart. It's harmony, and that's the idea of both what we're doing, partnering with schools of one mind in that, and then partnering with families in educating their children.
Beautiful. Heather, thank you so much. Well, we will definitely have you back on. There's so many topics that are tied to this that are on the hearts and minds of teachers and parents, and I appreciate your words of encouragement and direction today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Basecamp Live. Be sure to check out our website, basecamplive.com, for more than 8 years of timeless episodes that you'll find helpful and encouraging as well as the helpful resources offered on our partners page. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of our partners like the Herzog Foundation. See you back next week.